that recording. Okay. My name is Ann Wilson, and I coordinate the Alternative Dispute Resolution Project at Peak Parent Center. And I'm joined today by Catherine Rains, who is one of the statewide facilitators in the ADR project. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. We ask if you would like to introduce yourself in the chat, please add your name, where you're joining us from, and if you'd like to include your role. That just helps us get a sense of who's with us today. We ask that you remain muted for most of the presentation, but in the middle, we like it to be interactive. So at that point, when we're talking about some of the things that come up in communication, feel free to ask a question, or if you want to, we'll ask if anyone wants to ask a question, you can unmute at that point. Again, if you need, it would be great if everyone could select a language on the interpretation. So if you go to the globe and select either English or Spanish, that will enable you to hear from everyone in the room. You can also access the live transcript by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Again, this webinar is presented in conjunction with the Colorado Department of Education's Alternative Dispute Resolution Project, which we'll often refer to as the ADR project. The project is intended to support communication and collaboration among IEP team members and to prevent disputes. We do acknowledge that conflicts may arise that can't be resolved informally, and IDA provides specific dispute resolution processes for those situations. Peak Parent Center is Colorado's parent training and information center. We are a training and information center, and we present webinars such as this, but we don't provide any legal advice or any legal services. Okay. To start, again, I just want to emphasize the mission of the ADR project. ADR and facilitated IEP meetings are an optional process. And so in Colorado, we've developed the program so that it provides a funded support system and a toolbox of options for all special education stakeholders, meaning parents, advocates, educators, both general and special, administrators. We really want anyone and everyone to learn these skills to improve communication. Some people who have attended our webinars have asked for statistics. So we have this chart of dispute resolution statistics. It is a little bit skewed just because of the effects of the pandemic, but you can look at the first blue line is 2010 just as a baseline. IEP facilitation began in 2017, but it wasn't a full year until 2018. So you can see that we're hoping to see, a decrease in the formal processes of mediation, state complaints, and due process. But you can see how IEP facilitation is generally upward trend. We did have a drop in 2020 during the shutdown. And this year we are right now on track to exceed 2021. So you can see that this practice is growing. And then before we start our conversation with Kat, I just want to explain what facilitation is. Facilitation involves having an impartial facilitator. That means they don't represent anyone at the table. They come to the meeting to promote communication and participation by all. They can come to IEP meetings or other special education meetings. The process is voluntary, so the parties must agree. You can't make someone do facilitation. The parties have to agree to go forward with it. And we're finding that facilitative skills really can make all IEP meetings more effective, even without a facilitator. If the team is really using the skills, it can really increase collaboration. There's still some confusion about what's a facilitator. A facilitator, again, is impartial. They don't represent anyone. If you wanted someone to represent a family, that would be an advocate. They're representing one side or the other. They're not there to support the process. Facilitation has similarities with mediation, but the facilitation occurs in the IEP meeting or a meeting of the team, and the goal is to achieve the objective of the meeting. Mediation usually occurs when there's a conflict that hasn't been resolved, and then you go and have a separate meeting to reach a legal agreement. It's not a legal process. It doesn't involve going to an administrative hearing, and it doesn't have a third party saying someone wins or loses. We've also noticed that I know at least one district in the state calls their special education coordinators facilitators. So there can be some confusion. Someone will say, I had a facilitator in my meeting, and we don't know whether that if it's from that district, if they mean they had a facilitator as an IEP facilitator, or they meant that had someone from that role. So always helpful to clarify if you're not sure. One of the things that facilitators can support is meaningful participation. The IDEA and its regulations require that parents be provided an opportunity to be meaningful participants in the education of their children who are eligible for special education, which includes participating in the IEP meetings. A lot of times I hear people say, what does that really mean? Obviously the parents need to come to the meeting, but we do kind of have some key points about the family role in the IEP meetings. Parents are equal participants in the team processes, and they are team members. The IDEA brings all these people together because they have different perspectives and different information, and the goal is to work together to create the best plan for the student. But those bringing in all those perspectives and all that information can mean that people have different views and different perspectives, and that can lead to disagreement. The parents are the protector of the student's IDEA rights, but it is the school's obligation to propose the IEP that provides FAPE. That's the free, appropriate public education. But parents have the right to object to the school's proposal, but the parents can't demand that the IEP includes specific things. This is a kind of a collaborative process. We're working together to develop the plan, but it ultimately is the school's obligation. And let's see. And Kat, I'll let you get started if you want to talk about the IEP team. Is that, okay, or do you want me to go over it? Either way.
Nope, I'm happy to do that. And obviously, if I forget something, feel free to jump back in and fill in any of the blanks that I forget. Good afternoon, everybody. As Ann said, my name is Catherine Rains, and I go by Kat, and I am one of the regional special education facilitators through the Colorado Department of Education. Thank you guys for joining us today. I'm going to sort of pick up where Ann left off as far as explaining sort of my role and how I look at IEP team meetings. And this visual is a great place for me to start because I think it reflects what Ann was just saying and also how I approach this. And that is sort of the Knights of the Round Table approach to special education conversations. And this circle visual sort of identifies the people and the roles that are expected to be filled at an IEP meeting. Obviously, the child is appropriate and parents, fundamentally important to these conversations. Regular education teachers, school system representatives, could be someone from the district level, like a coordinator or special ed director. Transition services, if appropriate for the age of the child and where they are. Intervention specialists and other service providers as appropriate based on the needs of the child. And a person who can interpret evaluation results when you're doing an eligibility meeting. And others with knowledge or special expertise about the child. And those can include some of the guests that we talk about at IEP meetings, advocates, outside providers, things like that. As another guest to an IEP team, a facilitator, I'm going to sort of walk through some of these things and sort of talk about how I see these conversations evolving and sort of ways that we can all work to minimize some of the miscommunications and that can lead to disputes while we work through today's meeting. Please feel free to put any questions that you have for me in the chat. And I think Ann also will give a chance for just actual question and answer at the end as well, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Fine for me. And I just want to put out that this chart includes both the required members and optional members. But so this just gives you a good idea of the people you may see. And some meetings have a smaller group and some have a very large group.
Yep.
Let me, my cursor has just, there it is. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ann.
No, I was gonna say, and part of why we had this webinar today is that we hear from the facilitators and from our parent advisors think that a lot of conflict, although we, give a specific label, and Cal talked about this, that the most conflict is arising from misunderstanding, even though later it's a conflict about a specific thing. A lot of times the original thing was, and so that's why we wanted to bring Kat in with her vast experience in meetings and talk about communication. But sorry, I interrupt.
Nope. Yes. So basically, one of the things I was going to say with regards to all of this sort of stuff, including the picture from the slide before that includes the visual of the team. Ann is right. Sometimes, obviously, these teams can get very large. And one of the things that I always recommend at the beginning of all meetings is have everybody do a round of introductions. And at that time, everybody can state the role they have on the team. And that way, if it's a larger meeting or there are guests like advocates or outside providers or other people that are joining to support the process, everyone has an idea of who's at the table and sort of what role that they fill. So that would be a great way to start by jumping into some of the things that I'm seeing in trends and the things that I do that pretty much everyone can do to help sort of minimize these initial forms of conflict that can start through miscommunication or misunderstanding and grow from there and turn into a full-blown conflict down the road. I'm going to sort of start off with some trends and examples I'm seeing this year and some and strategies that I use to sort of mitigate some of these things. But if you guys have questions about specific instances that you're coming up against, or either as parents or as advocates in your own roles, please feel free to either put it in the chat, or when we get to that question and answer, please, we can have a conversation about them at that time. And also, I don't mind if you just raise your hands as well, and we can sort of make as much room as possible to get some specifics addressed.
Now, and Kat, when you say raise hands, do you mean the raise hand feature on Zoom, or
either one?
Because I can't see I can't see people. So if you want to raise your hand, I think the raise hand feature will show up. Or we'll try and monitor. And if you raise your hand and we aren't answering, maybe just put in the chat that you have your hand up. Just so that
yes, I have the benefit of not sharing my screen, so
I
can
see
everybody.
You can see.
So I'm okay. I'll just keep an eye on it.
Yep. Okay.
But either one works. And again, one of the things that we've done in this virtual environment is switch some of our meetings online. So I'm fully versed now in watching people's screens and making sure everyone has a chance to participate when I do virtual meetings, so that we'll be good to go. But until we have any questions, I'm going to sort of go through this list that you see on the screen in front of you right now and sort of highlight sort of how I see these things impacting conversations and things that we can all do to sort of help prevent conflicts and issues from becoming bigger problems as they arise. Obviously, I know there are meetings where the conflict is genuinely significant, where parents and or people that are working with the student at the school have real fundamental different ideas about what the student needs, what things should look like, and things like that. But a lot of the times when I go into meetings, what I see is people who really aren't that far apart on what they're looking for to support a child, but maybe they're not having a conversation that reflects how close together they may be, or they're not asking enough questions of each other to sort of figure out where those differences truly lie, to try to find some consensus and move forward to get a plan of support in place for a child. And so one of the things that I find fundamental, and also comes up a lot, is basically just different understandings of what different IEP terms and words and processes mean. So as a facilitator, when these sorts of things come up, and they can come up in so many different ways, it can basically be what the meeting is about. Fundamentally, the different type of special education meeting. Is this an annual review? Is this an evaluation meeting? Is this, an additional meeting to talk about potentially, amending the IEP. Any of those things can quickly be dealt with by just creating an agenda or stating the purpose of the meeting right at the beginning, so everybody's on the same page. And that way, if there are any questions about what that means or anything like that, those can be asked at the very beginning and really prevent sort of one of the first initial miscommunications that can happen in the IEP and special education process. It can also be special education and education in general is full of a lot of jargon. And I always joke and say, as someone with a legal background, I didn't think anything had more jargon than a legal education until I started working in special education. And then I realized that there are more things, acronyms, specific words, terms of art, things like that, that if you work in the environment of special education can become, just simple turns of phrase you use all the time. But if you're new to the process, whether you're a parent or a grandparent or new to advocacy or even new to education, can cause a roadblock. So one of the things that I recommend is defining the terms we use and how we are using them. So if I use the term IEP meeting, defining what I mean by IEP meeting, I mean an annual review of a student's IEP. That way, we all know what perspective I'm bringing to the term and how I'm using it. And that way, if different understandings for the term exists between team members, we can clarify it right away. Same with the different parts of the IEP. What do we mean by measurable goals? What do we mean by accommodations? Things like that. As long as we can create that foundation of knowledge and understanding that's equal, it helps us have better conversations because we're at least having the same conversation around the same terms and ideas. And as parents and advocates, one of the things I recommend, not only defining terms when you use them, just from your perspective, is just always ask for clarification. If somebody is using a term while they present their evaluation or talk about their student, how, your child in their classroom or things like that, just go ahead and politely ask for clarification. Can you tell me what you mean by that? Or can you tell me what you mean when you use that term? Things like that. And again, this is just way to prevent misunderstandings and miscommunication from even starting some of these simple things. And the other thing too is a lot of times there's more than one person in the room that doesn't understand the term or is using it in a different context. So I always ask, hey, I'm a layperson here. Can you guys explain that for me so I know what you're talking about here today? And that sort of simple way of taking the onus on myself just gives everybody a chance to really just have the same conversation when it comes to using terms within the IEP conversation in the special education process. The next bullet point we have down here is not knowing what the process or delivery of services look like in practice or at different stages in the IEP of special education. And by different stages, I'm going to define this for myself in this conversation, and that is the different stages a child has in education, whether it be when they transition from, the pre-3, if they have an IFSP, up into preschool and they transition to an IEP, or transitioning between school settings, like when a kid moves from preschool to an elementary school, onto middle school, onto high school. Throughout my years of experience, those transitions between types of school settings, whether it be preschool to elementary or elementary to middle or middle to high school, can be really difficult, and where a lot of these issues and miscommunications can happen just because we all have expectations of understanding and make assumptions about what other people are thinking and what's going to come next and things like that. And so it's really important to sort of slow this process down and ask questions about what things are going to look like as you transition from one stage to the next. When I facilitate meetings, one of the things that I recommend is that the team members that work for the school start this process by explaining, this is what it looks like in preschool. When you get to kindergarten next year, it's probably going to look like this, and sort of gradually prepare for that transition by defining what the special education process looks like as far as service delivery in different environments or different stages in a student's life. When we were prepping for this conversation, one of the things Anna and I were talking about is sort of that middle school to high school transition and how difficult that can be, because so many things change for any student when they move from the middle school environment to the high school environment. around, or from the elementary school environment into the middle school environment, and just how important it is to make sure we're all on the same page around even sort of how service minutes are going to be provided. If a child starts an IEP year off in May in 5th grade at elementary school and finishes the rest of the IEP year off middle school, going from 1 class teacher to 6 classroom teachers, or depending on obviously depending on the school environment. And so one of the things that I like to do when it comes to these sorts of things is bring in or ask questions, or ask if I can have access to someone who can provide this context for the entire team, whether it's seeing if there's someone that could come to an IEP team from the next school to provide some explanation about what services will look like when the child moves on to the next school building, or, just someone familiar with that setting.
And
Again, yep, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and I think like those are also great questions that parents can note, that like,
Yep.
if no one's telling me that, then just say, can someone just give me some context on what this change is going to look like? So some of these things that Kat does can be great questions for us as parents to ask as well. Just point that out.
Yep. And yeah, and thank you for pointing that out. I think that any of the stuff that I do in these things and ask in questions can really be done by anybody on an IEP team, including parents. So yeah, when I use these examples, I definitely think anyone can ask a lot of these similar questions, no matter what, whether you have a facilitator or not. Anyway, so, and again, so these transition stages obviously can provide a lot of chances for some of this miscommunication and misunderstanding to happen. So yeah, just ask questions is one of the things that I get almost like a broken record. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. As a facilitator, one of the things that I have found is that can prevent so many issues from elevating to what I would call a stage of conflict, is just sort of asking clarifying questions and getting additional information and providing additional information and context of your own to make sure that, you give everybody on the team the chance to have the most transparent conversation about a student as possible, and sort of find that consensus point and be able to put that plan into place for that student. And again, a lot of this has to do with and I know a lot of the next bullet is lack of complete information, but I think it works really hand in hand with the idea of making assumptions. No matter who we are, whether we're parents, which I am as well, or professionals, or in this conversation, a lot of times we fill in blanks. We don't even realize we do it sometimes, where if we don't receive a complete picture or a complete set of information, we fill it in with the information that we have on our own in our own heads. And a lot of times those assumptions that we use to fill in blanks when the communication has broken down, or we're not receiving things that make sense to us or that provide that clear picture we want, we start filling in our own assumptions. And that really, really, really can cause a lot of misunderstanding and miscommunication between team members. And this can happen in every level. Obviously with us as parents, also can impact just different people from the school setting that also sit on an IEP team, including like breakdown between a special education teacher and the general education teacher, or one of the service providers like a speech language pathologist and the special education teacher. I mean, these sorts of breakdowns happen across relationships. And I really do think that the best way to prevent us from making assumptions is to stop our conversations and our thoughts loud. We call it mind chatter when we teach, when we train facilitators, but that's that ability for us to stop a second and go, wait a minute, I'm filling in my own blanks here. I want to make sure I'm on the right page. And so I'm going to reach out to so-and-so and I'm going to ask them a question and see if they can't help me fill in the blanks with the real information. And this comes up a lot in the meetings I go to, but it also comes up in the stories I hear when I do trainings. And one of the examples that I have kind of goes back to not knowing what different things look like in different stages. I had a teacher come to me once and ask how to process questions, help families understand different things from their perspective as a service provider. And one of the questions she said was, I have a lot of people asking me what good is 20 minutes of service is going to do for their child. And I said, well, I don't know how to answer that question, but maybe if you provide a little bit more information about what that 20 minutes looks like, not just in the context of what the services you provide or what the goal of that, like what the goal is you're working on, but also just developmentally, 20 minutes to me as an adult obviously is not a lot of time, but 20 minutes for a preschooler to be in a social group could be an eternity, right? It has to do with so many things that we use every day to create these pictures. If we use our own set of things, our own experiences only, like me as an adult, 20 minutes is nothing, right? I don't see the benefit, but if you talk about it in terms of trying to get preschoolers to do anything for that long, right? It could be a really valuable amount of time to work on, those social goals when they're little. So just sort of making sure that you're not putting your own information into into that to create that complete picture. Reach out and ask those questions. And again, I think we're noticing a pattern that basically what I see a lot of times is conversations that aren't as transparent as they could be. And some of the easiest ways to raise the level of transparency in our meetings is to ask questions, right? It's also to, as a parent, we always recommend, and I think, and you could probably talk to this from your side as well, that one of the coolest ways to prepare as a parent for a meeting is to sort of do a parent input form. And you can do it because the school sends one out to you, or you can do it on your own. And I think there's a copy probably later in this slideshow of one that we recommend, but it's basically a way to help you organize your thoughts before you go into it, an IEP meeting or a special education meeting of any kind. Because we know that these meetings can be overwhelming. They can be really big. There's always a lot more to get accomplished than looks like is feasible during the time allotted. Not always, but sometimes. And this way you can, in the quiet of your own home, when you have time, when there's no pressure and all of those things, you can fill out a form or identify the areas of concern that you have for your student, or the questions you want to ask, or the terms you don't understand or you're confused about, and sort of just jot all that stuff down so that when you get into the meeting, you're sort of have a fallback, right? You have something in front of you that can help you, remind you during these sometimes overwhelming situations, sort of what information that you wanted to get during this time, and what things that you're concerned about. And that again is another tool to help you with this whole complete information, right? To get the complete picture of your child and help make sure that you understand what's going on in the school setting, what things look like, what goals are being worked on, things like that. And avoid some of the assumption making and some of the other things that can lead to miscommunication and breakdowns in the relationships of members on the IEP teams. Any questions, please feel free to put in the chat or jump in here with specific instances, either as advocates or parents, or I was looking at the box and those are sort of the people I'm seeing here. So that may have run across in your own meetings if you have any questions about things like that. I think parents and advocates make great facilitators. And so that's why I think some of this work with Peak is so important is as a facilitator, obviously I sort of come in as a neutral sort of to a meeting when things kind of get a little bit rockier, but everybody can use these question asking tools in their own meetings to prevent the need for me. Not that there's anything wrong with calling in a facilitator. I recommend them. It can help even before things get too complicated or full of conflict. But some of these simple things like writing things down, asking questions, asking for terms to be explained can really go a long way in helping clear up any sort of misunderstandings that happen. The other thing, I don't know if you can see behind me, but the other thing that can be really helpful when it comes to having these sort of group conversations is what we call charting in the facilitator world. But basically, it's just visually documenting the conversation. And then everybody can see what you guys come up with as a team. And that way, if somebody thought something was completely different, it gives you a chance to sort of explain any sort of inconsistencies and understanding right then, because when you document it, everybody has a chance to see it. And if it's not what they had pictured in their head, it wasn't the goal that they thought they were agreeing to, things like that, you can stop the conversation, go back and visit what you had just gone through and sort of figure out where things went wonky. before you even leave the meeting. Talk about the best time to prevent conversation, conflicts from happening would be right in that moment and right in that time when the potential misunderstanding happened. And it can be done real simple, like the way I do it, with a dry erase board or a chalkboard, and sticky notes. They're my favorite friend. But just simple notes, one word at a time, a couple short phrases can really help support that group understanding of a conversation and make sure everybody's on the same page. Other things that we use and that anyone can use are simple visuals as far as charting questions. I do see in the chat that somebody would like a copy of the parent input form, Ann. So
Yeah,
that'll be awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And you could do, as a parent, you could sort of use a similar form to send questions that you may have for the team ahead of time so that they can have, so that they can be prepared to be able to address any questions or concerns you have. It doesn't all have to be about them asking you for information. You can send them a list of questions in advance too, and sort of give that way they know sort of where your issues or concerns may lie or some of the things that you may want to address. And it can be real specific or just be like, I know that we have a lot to cover and I would like to make sure we spend a bunch of time on the goals section at our next meeting because I have a lot of concerns with reading or math or wherever your issue is. It doesn't have to be super specific, but just help each other understand where you're coming from can be really helpful. When I know a specific team well enough because I've worked with them for a long time, or when I get information back, when I get asked to facilitate, the first thing I do is send out an introduction letter to the team explaining who I am and what my process is. And I ask for some information from them. And it is for me to identify for myself the purpose of the meeting, things that we've already talked about today, to create an agenda and send it out to the team in advance. And when I get a bunch of information, a lot of times it helps me understand where the potential miscommunication has occurred, how elevated the miscommunication has become, whether or not it's rising to the actual level of conflict, or if it's just sort of starting to bubble. Areas of concern where they are the same and where they're different between parents and advocates and other members of the team, like the school teachers and things like that. And you guys can all do the same stuff too by just asking for information or providing your own input in ahead of a meeting. And then when I come to develop the agenda, I highlight those areas as potential areas where I think we're going to be spending the bulk of our time. Again, all I'm doing is creating sort of expectations, right? Transparency, making sure that everybody's on the same page. And by asking questions and by sending in your questions in advance and things like that, you can help create that transparency for your students meeting by just sort of heading off those miscommunications off at the pass. And I did see in the chat about charting, and yes, I'm totally happy to do another one about charting, because charting is definitely something, whether in-person meetings or online, is something that you do get better with practice. But truthfully, also, it's just anyone can do it. It really is just a great way to create some group memory, as I call it, or visual memory for a group. And it also helps to highlight successes when people come to consensus or agreement around different things. If you mark it on the board, it helps you see sort of how far you've come as a group too, which can also help in moving conversations forward. And
I think, Kat, sometimes in the training, in the facilitator training, you talk about how at the beginning of charting, you create that strengths kind of, you kind of put the child at the front and have everyone highlight the strengths. I think that's
you can, my little star picture behind me here is meant to do just that. And at the beginning of every meeting, one of the things that I also do, and this can help prevent not so much the misunderstanding and stuff like that, but help keep that meeting focused where it should be, which is on that student or that child, right? Not on the adults in the room. Because when we focus on each other, that's when we run into issues. When we stay focused on the student, things typically go much better. But one of the things that we always do is start with a conversation about who the child is just as a kiddo, as I say, outside of special education, outside of data, outside of things like that. Just a conversation about what they like. Legos, Minecraft, horses. That's a lot of what I hear. Dogs, lots of dogs, but just to make sure that we do stay focused on that student and that kid and that child, and make sure that our conversation is supporting them and keep it off of us, because who wants to focus on all the adults in the room, right? And then information without context, again, that goes back to some of the examples we've already used, but that's just sort of when you're looking at an IEP document, a draft or a complete one, or you're having a conversation that is real focused on specific details that are part of that plan of support, it's real easy to lose sight of the bigger context, right? All children, whether they have an IEP or a 504 or not, their environment in education is so much bigger than just that document and those goals and those accommodations and things like that. And so a lot of times getting more information through question asking, or any of that sort of stuff can really help fill in the blanks, so that when you talk about accommodations, and this is something that I see in every environment that I work in, whether it's a preschool classroom or an elementary school classroom, but more often probably in middle school and high school, where kids have a lot of different teachers. A lot of times there's a lot of issues around what accommodations should be for a student. And a lot of times some of that conflict and that concern, especially from the perspective parents and advocates that I see in my meetings, has to do with what those accommodations, not only what they are, but if the teacher, the gen ed teachers know what that accommodation means and how they will use it in that classroom, right? And so I like to involve the gen ed teacher in the IEP conversation when we're having those meetings and have them explain those types of things for these accommodations, right? So a fairly typical accommodation that a lot of us see are things like preferred seating in the classroom, or extra processing time, or extended time on assignments, right? So those are things that as parents we may have in our kids' IEP, as advocates we may see a lot in different meetings and settings, and as professionals, we hear all the time. But I understand that sometimes parents want to make sure that the general ed teachers know what those mean in their classrooms and what they look like. So a lot of times I'll just ask the general ed teachers at IEP meetings, can you tell me what that looks like in your classroom? Or if you get this IEP and it has this accommodation on it, how would you do that? And just have them provide that additional information to support the creation of that context, right? And that way, if this specific general ed teacher says, okay, so in my classroom, preferred seating can mean the child gets to pick, a seat that makes them feel comfortable. But also if they're sitting next to someone and it turns into something where those two people don't work well together, preferred seating can be, making sure that that child is put in a place in where there's not that distraction anymore. I mean, I know from my personal experience with my kiddo, sometimes preferred seating means he can't sit by the person he'd prefer to sit next to because that doesn't work so well, right? But just asking for that context from that gen ed teacher can go a long way to helping understand what accommodations look like in practice in an environment. Let's see, inconsistent practices. I think, Anne, do you want to sort of give me a little bit more information on this one? I know we talked about this, but I just want to make sure.
Yeah, and I think, this can appear in a lot of ways. Some of it's like, and I was just going to say, just to Vicky's question, Vicky, I think that's a great question. You can get into more conversation with our parent advisors. There are a few of them that are on the webinar today, so they'll be aware of your question, and I'll put their email, and they're great people to talk through that. But we are big fans of including the students in the IEP meetings. And so anyway, well, hopefully you guys can connect. But I think one is there can be inconsistent practices within, for the students that are going, even when they're following the IEP, they can still implement it differently, even in the same school. So that can be hard, especially I have a a student who's pretty rigid and really likes things to be the same. And actually, sometimes you have inconsistent practices grade to grade. And I know some of our hardest years have been after having a really exceptional teacher who goes above and beyond. And then the next year, we have, you know, a great teacher who doesn't do a lot of the things that the teacher did before that weren't part of the IEP. It was just this is how this teacher approaches it. And it's really hard for my student to understand why did that teacher do this and why doesn't this teacher do that. And so that I think sometimes if you have and sometimes having those situations where your child is having trouble with the teacher can be really hard for parents, and it can be a really hard one to navigate because that's not something we get from the IEP process. But
Yeah.
it's probably a longer explanation.
Nope, that makes sense to me. Thank you for the clarification. See, I was asking her for additional information so that I didn't make any assumptions about what that was supposed to be about, so that I can make sure, you know, to sort of fine tune my answer into sort of that expectation. So when it comes to the inconsistent practices, obviously all teachers are different, right? They have different personalities, they have different, you know, strengths, they have different ideas about different things. And so every classroom looks different. One of the things that I do, as far as what Anne, you were talking about, a lot of times if there is a teacher on an IEP team, whether it's a special ed teacher or a general education teacher or a specialist teacher or whoever that really has a great relationship with a student or has had a really positive year with the student or things like that, during a meeting, I'll ask them, what have you done that's different than, you know, are you doing anything that's different than what's on this IEP right here? Like, are there accommodations that you're using in the classroom that you don't realize you're using? And give them that chance to sort of figure out if what they're really doing in the room, if it's a personality thing, it's a personality thing. And obviously we all have teachers, we had them growing up and our kids have them now where, you know, they get along really well with the teacher just because they do. And, you know, and those personality things, there's not a lot that we can do about that. But sometimes I find that some gen ed teachers make up the best accommodations out there. And if you give an opportunity to talk about what they're doing for a student in their classroom, it could provide some opportunity to add some additional accommodations for those next years to come to sort of keep those practices consistent, because they may be doing something in their classroom that they are totally unaware of could be considered an accommodation for this student, because it's something they always do for their kiddos. And they don't realize that not all teachers do that. And I've had that come up in settings where we have a child whose IEP has a lot of behavior related goals and maybe a behavior plan because, you know, they have a tendency to, a lot of times, especially when they're younger, like elope from the classroom, right? So if they're given a task that isn't something that they want to do or feel comfortable doing, or it's really hard for them, you know, they leave, they go out in the hallway. And every once in a while, when we're having those meetings, we'll have that teacher where that kid is never eloped from their classroom ever, right? They've never left that classroom. Well, let's find out why. Ask that gen ed teacher, what are you doing with him in your classroom? And maybe what they're doing with him is something that can be added to the IEP for other teachers to use, or for teachers in subsequent years to use, to really help keep that kid focused and in the classroom and not, you know, unsafe running around the halls and stuff like that. So I think filling in those blanks by engaging all relevant members of the IEP team in the conversation can be super duper helpful for these sorts of inconsistencies. And again, as Anne was saying, some of it's going to be personality related and some of it are things that we can't fix. But sometimes what you can do with the question asking is sort of unearth something that can really help everybody support a child. So anything else I'm missing with that one, or any of these at all? Because I know we have some time and I'm not seeing a ton of questions.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to take them.
And I think they all sort of interrelate too, because it's, you know, but what can we do in those situations that maybe we hadn't? I like how you mentioned highlighting what work, you know, it's kind of that what works, what doesn't work, and really highlighting what works and thinking about ways you could add that in. What if if we just kind of go through the rest of our slides and then we can take down our screen and see if anyone has any additional questions.
Okay. And one more thing before we do that I was sort of thinking of as far as ways to sort of figure out if there's a concern or a difference of opinion on what a goal should be like for instance, whether or not you should be working on phonics or fluency in a reading goal or things like that, use questions that way too. Use questions to ask the teacher, what do you mean by that? Why is this your focus? What is totally included in that? How will those things be measured? Just ask a bunch of questions until you sort of get a better idea or a better picture of what's going on. And that can help us figure out where differences are and where we stand on an item like a goal, but also how far apart we really are. A lot of times when I go into meetings, the differences that people want and the tweaks made to goals really aren't super, super, super far apart. And it's pretty easy to cross those guides and come to a consensus once we figure that out. So sorry, I just wanted to add that before.
No, that's great. And it's such a good point too, just to think about using questions. I know when I was a young parent, just getting into this process, you're kind of like a deer in the headlights a little bit, kind of just sitting there listening and trying to take it all and figure it out, and not, thinking you're supposed to know things that you don't know. And so I definitely gained increasing comfort over the years and just asking a lot of questions. But like you said, filling in the blanks. If we don't ask the questions, we fill in the blanks somehow, and it's usually, or it can often be in not the most positive. It can be kind of reflect our anxieties or what we're worried about. So I think that's just a great point of like using the questions. And I know that can be hard, especially parents who are new to the process, but it can really help a lot, because things can take on a life of their own, which never needed to be if you don't ask those questions. So great advice. And I definitely like that, like highlighting the practicing practice, filling in the blanks, getting more context. But I think they all sort of interrelate. Vicki, you can get a training. In fact, we have the first day of the 3-day training coming up at the Peak office building on next week, on Tuesday, May 3rd, is a way to do it. But CDE specifically has positions for facilitators, and so they have 4 regional facilitators. But you can get the training to be a facilitator, and from time to time those positions open up. But so it's something to keep. It's great to have the training and use it. And some districts have their own capacity of facilitators who have done the trainings. But so anyway, the first day of the training is next week, and then there's 2 additional days. But CDE office offers them from time to time. And some districts, if you had a group at D11 who wanted to do some, you can also request trainings for your group.
Yep. And at the end of the slideshow, Vicki, is the link to our website for CDE's facilitators. And when we do have trainings, we post them up on there. Right now, CDE is not doing in-person trainings. That's why we're not hosting any currently. But we will come out and do trainings for groups that request them, like what Ann was saying. So,
but it would be, if anyone who wants to sign up for that training, it's on our website, but it's on May 3rd, and we'd love to have more of you.
yeah.
This is the parent input form that Kat mentioned. And so this is just what it looks like. And again, it can be a great way for parents to think ahead. I often forget everything I meant to do in the meeting, and even I even write down what I want to make sure we talk about. But the meetings just I sort of you get flustered in the moment, and then I leave and like, oh, I forgot that. So this can be a great way to just sort of prepare. And again, I know Vicki wanted, but if anyone else wanted this form, put your email in or send me your email. And we've kind of talked about this, but there are many ways to engage with facilitation, starting with taking this webinar and using facilitative skills in your meeting. As I mentioned, there are some districts have some facilitator capacity, but that you have to check with your special education director. And then there's the 4 impartial statewide facilitators, one of which is Kat. If you want to request a facilitator, this is the website. I always just Google CDE ADR to get there, but there's a button right there to request a facilitator. Sometimes people ask if you need to get agreement before you request them, and you do not need to get the agreement. Once you request it, then the CDE will reach out and get the agreement of the parties.
So if a parent sends us a request, the person in our office that handles those will reach out to the special ed director for the district where you guys are as parents and make sure it's okay. And then they assign one of us. And then we send out introduction emails to everybody that on the request.
And I think we sort of, yeah, the request can be made by either the parents or the district or school. And they come in from both sides. I think it's pretty even.
Yep.
But then both parties must agree. And then as Kat said, that then they'll follow up and set the agenda, and then they'll make sure everyone's agreed. Just some additional resources. The CD website has some great resources about the project. Peak, that's our website. We're also working on, it's actually had a soft launch of our ADR resource page. So we are creating a specific ADR resource page that you can check to get more information on the project and the skills. And then Cadre is the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution and Special Education. And they've got great resources on there. These are just highlighting a few of theirs. They've got some videos, an old webinar about how the brain responds to conflict and making sure we keep ourselves in the zone where we can actually be productive. And then just additional resources on IEP facilitation throughout the country. I mentioned or in the chat that there are office hours. So Vicki, if you wanted to just talk with one of the facilitators about charting, that would be an opportunity to go there. They do some coaching every Tuesday from 3 to 5. They're going to be ending in May 31st for the summer, but then they'll be back in the fall.
Yep.
So this link is here, but it's also on the ADR page.
And I'm the second, Vicki, just because you've met me, I'm the second week of the month, but we all rotate. So
that's good to know.
Mhm.
I have one question.
Oh,
Go
okay.
ahead, Eva.
Is that?
Yeah, it's me, Eva, Anna.
Uh-huh.
And let me try in English because but my English is so horrible.
Are you on the and Marisol can translate for you.
Okay.
If you can you hear her, Marisol?
I think Marisol, she is not here.
Do you have, are you on the Spanish?
No, I'm not translation for me today. I don't know, but I stay in the meeting, but I have the question about for the facilitator.
Okay.
When I come the friend with help when one IEP just for the not for facilitator, it's okay, but some families ask me about for when speak Spanish and don't understand the system for education system, but that's for come with the United States for couple months ago, and some people don't understand nothing for the system, for the education system. And Katerina, I listen when you say ask question, but sometimes the families when don't know happen with the system, for the education system, don't ask question because don't understand nothing. No, the IEP, the system for education and everything. That's why is what happened with the family don't have any welcome to the schools, because when I come to the United States, some people don't understand nothing for the in United States, the system, the school is free, but in some places in South America and Mexico, I need to pay for the public schools.
Okay.
pay the books and everything. When I come to here, it's all of it changes, especially in education, especially.
Mhm.
Sorry about that for my question.
No, that's okay. It sounds, Marisol, can you?
I
Yep.
can hear you.
Marisol, ¿me oye?
I think she signed in after you gave your directions.
Oh, let's see.
Marisol, ¿me oye?
Did you? She can't hear. Eva, did you select Spanish from the globe?
No, when I come to the in the chat, don't show the globe for the translation. I don't know.
And so quick, Anne, can you put contact information for the parent advisor that might be able to help her?
Yes. Do you know Myrna?
Yes, I know Mirna.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I have the phone number for Mirna.
Okay.
Okay.
But
Right.
Okay.
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 Well, and that's a really good question, because I do know that even to, people who are familiar with the system, it's fairly complicated, and stuff. I know that Peak has trainings on the basic fundamentals of the IEP process. And so sending families to Peak to get some of those resources could be helpful. I would also recommend maybe requesting a facilitator, and then when they get asked, when they are assigned a facilitator, and that facilitator does that introduction email and sends it out, to make sure that they put that information in the form, because we always get information from both the family and somebody from the school team side to sort of find out what's going on. And if the family gets that form, if she's supporting whoever, to make sure that that's part of it, that this is that there's just, they need to have a better understanding of for how the United States does special education. And then we as facilitators can make sure that we're asking those questions to help them get the information that they need. But I think between the two of those things, and I think, Anne, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys can connect families to additional resources besides just yourselves too.
yes,
It could help with that
definitely.
process.
And I like your point about possibly using a facilitator, because like I heard from another state that sometimes they use facilitators to kind of model a well-run meeting. And so if you bring a facilitator in, they can sort of slow things down and make sure that information is getting out there. And so if the families don't have the context to ask the questions, maybe the facilitator can help facilitate that. And, it might take longer, but it's one of those things where it might take a little longer, but it will help things in the longer run. But that's a good situation where it's not really conflict. It's just this meeting could really benefit from facilitation.
And I have facilitated meetings with interpreters in the past, but I don't know exactly how to connect. And I've had advocates at meetings who are bilingual too, but I'm not sure sort of where that resource is accessible from. So I don't know, Anne, if Peak would be better equipped to provide her with some different resources to share with families that may need that.
Yeah. Like, and it is unfortunate. That's one of the things that we've talked about in other meetings, is just there's not enough resources in other languages, but we definitely have noted that point, and we're trying to collect them and do more. So, well, now we have used up our time. If anyone has follow-up questions here, I'll go back. Here's Kat's email, and also Marianne, who coordinates the program through CDE, if you want to follow up a thing. And again, think about the office hours, and here's my contact information, and as well as our parent advisor. Do you want me to go back to that, Ava?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
And again, I am in office hours currently the second Tuesday of the month. And I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you may have that you didn't want to ask in front of a group. Otherwise, whoever's in there can answer the questions no matter what, whoever it is.